The defendant is a monster. There's just no other way to describe it. Absolute monster for the havoc that she's wreaked upon our society, upon our citizens. It's deplorable, it's disgusting.
Oh, boo-hoo. Is she really sad that she's just been sentenced to a very, very long time in prison? In fact, so long the likelihood is that she's never going to see the light of day. Ah, would that make us all feel sorry for her? No, it won't. What we're dealing with in this case is a female of the highest level. Add to that, she very specifically targeted a particular type of children because she believed it would mean that she could get away with it. The case of Brittney Lyon is the stuff of nightmares. And of course, for some reason, because this is a female perpetrator of child abuse, there is always that part of your brain that just says, how can this be? How can it be that the very people we imagine we can trust more, we can trust most, in fact, in this world, are females? We believe they're less violent, they're less sinister. And this is not me being negative towards men. It just plays out in the statistics. And yet here we are dealing with a prolific perpetrator of child abuse. Right, before I crack on with today's true crime case, I'm just going to talk a little bit about an app that you're all messaging me about. So remember when I told you that there was that app that pays you to test games and apps? Well, you have given me so much feedback and loads of you are still asking me about it and would like me to answer some questions. So I'm going to reintroduce it properly. So you've asked me what the app's called. It's called Tester Up, and I will leave the link down in the description, pin comment, and you'll see a QR code on the screen right now so you can scan it directly. You've asked me, how much money can you make? Well, you can earn up to £80 or $80 for every single app or game you test. And it's not just gaming. Like I said, there are apps and also surveys too. You asked me, is it a legitimate app? Yeah, 100%. Developers need people like you and me to test out their apps and games, and basically all that happens is your feedback, it helps them improve their products, and in return you will get rewarded for doing that. It's that simple. You asked me, how does the payout work? That's the most important question, isn't it? So payments are super quick. They're processed within 24 hours and they go straight into your bank account or PayPal. So you don't have to wait weeks at all to see your money. So if you are, after I've just answered those questions, still unsure, well, Tester Up already has over 3 million users and a really, really solid Trustpilot rating of 4.1 out of 5. Honestly, why not give it a go? The link's in the description, pin comment, and the QR code is right there on your screen. So download it for free, try it out, and let me know in the comments how much you've made so far. I love hearing your stories. Why not start earning right now? Well, not right now, after you've watched my video. We go back to 2016 in this case. This is when families in San Diego literally trusted this horrific excuse for a female, Brittney Lyon, to care for their children and to care specifically for their children with autism and special needs. Let that sink in. This is about an individual who went out of her way to look for children with specific vulnerabilities because she knew that that would most likely lead to more silence where her crimes were concerned. And it wasn't just her. She was actually satisfying her boyfriend, Samuel Cabrera, as well. They both together exploited trust in the most horrific way, targeting at least 4 young girls precisely because those disabilities made it harder for them to speak out. And this case has shocked California. It's also exposed some really dangerous gaps in child protection, and it's left so many people outraged, myself included. Now, before I carry on with the details of this horrific case, just want to shout out big thank you to all of you coming back to my channel. I appreciate every single one of you. If you have not subscribed yet though, could you please do that? It makes a massive difference to me. Also, if you like my content, please do give me a like. And for those of you supporting me on Patreon, YouTube, community, membership, I don't know what I would do without you. As ever, thank you so much. And I hope that you're enjoying all the full-length content and podcasts that you're getting there as well. Let's talk about this horrific case. And you all know I have such disdain for these kind of human beings that retaining composure through this is going to be challenging, shall we say. Let's talk about the main perpetrator in this case. Let's talk about 31-year-old Brittney May Lyon. That's how old she is now. She wasn't at the time of her crimes. There isn't a lot that's been reported about her upbringing and her own family life, but she was from San Diego. She lived in Escondido and later in San Marcos at the time of the actual commission of the crimes. She studied child development. Of course she did. Because what that's going to do is mean that people who hear about your qualifications are going to believe that you committed to kids. That's the perfect mask, isn't it? She studied that at California State University in Northridge. She considered herself and advertised herself as a professional babysitter. And she also added that speciality being that she cared for children with autism and special needs. This is just how malevolent this human being is. I mean, she's literally wrapping herself up in a disguise where people from the outside are thinking, look at this vocational individual who cares deeply for children. Look at the fact that she wants to work with the most vulnerable children. I mean, that makes most people think this person has a heart of gold. And that's exactly what she wanted you to think. Now, she advertised on babysitting websites like care.com and Sitter City. So she was somebody who obviously put herself out there as much as possible to garner interest from parents. And she touted her interest in working with special needs children. And through this, she did gain the trust of multiple families. And one of the things about being a human being that we often underestimate is just how trusting we are. We're not stupid. We're not foolish. We just have to trust our environment. We have to trust the people that we meet, because otherwise we would be shrouded in anxiety and paranoia 24/7. Think about the micro trusts that you make every single day of the week. You get up, you make your morning coffee. You don't think, oh, I might get electrocuted by the kettle. You eat your toast. You don't think, oh, I might choke to death on this toast. They are micro trusts. When the person at the door delivering your package arrives, you don't think they're probably going to murder me. All of these things could happen, but we don't want to live in a world where we trust nothing. So we build these micro trusts, and we do that with people that we contact about childcare, for example. If they seem nice, if they have the appropriate documentation, if they say the right things, that micro trust plays into your decision making. Now, one of the things that the parents did, obviously they're placing vulnerable children in her care, is they wanted references. So that's what happened. They got reference checks by parents that had previously had their children with this particular individual, and there were no obvious red flags that came up there. One mother who actually hired Lyon in 2015, she said, I did my reference checks, I contacted parents who had used her in the past, and everything seemed normal. Because bear in mind, child molesters are really adept at manipulation. They manipulate everyone. They don't just groom the kids, they groom the parents. That's your entry point. It's as simple as that. Lyon even bragged that she was working on a research paper for child development because she was doing a degree in it. And this was basically a claim that she used so she could justify taking children out on special outings alone. So very equipped to create this spider's web of deception. Now, Lyon's ability to blend in as this benign and harmless caregiver, it just makes the crimes even more disturbing because you can see the methodology behind it, the premeditation behind it, and the honing of her skills behind it. And she was able to care for many vulnerable children, specifically really between the ages of 3 and 7. And the reason that she goes with that age group again is because they are less able to report abuse. Some children will do, but for the most part, children are abused in these time periods because they don't understand what's going on. They're not educated on sex education on the whole. They don't realise what's appropriate or inappropriate. And lots of parents don't teach the kids that, not because they're bad parents, just because it doesn't figure. They're not thinking the world around them is so dire that they need to inform their children about safe touch and unsafe touch. And actually, some parents find that really disturbing to even have to consider, so put it to the back of their mind, which means that lots of children who encounter this kind of situation end up staying silent about it until a point where they realise it was wrong. And that often happens at high school. Let's also talk about the co-conspirator in these horrific crimes, Samuel Cabrera. Now, he was her boyfriend, and same as Lyon, Cabrera was 22 when they were both arrested in 2016. 22! Let this sink in. We are talking about individuals who are really young, who have this fascination and predilection. And this is one of the things that really disturbs me these days. I'm sure many of you will have heard the term MAPS being applied to perverts. That means minor attracted persons. As if, for example, we're talking about it as a sexual classification as opposed to a sexual perversion. When you are 22, it demonstrates, it's inherent within your nature. It's who you are. If at 22 you're doing these things, you're going to be doing it at 42, 62, 82. It's who you are. It's your attraction level. But it's not a sexual orientation. It's a sexual perversion. And they both have and share this sexual perversion. Now, he lived in Carlsbad, California, which is a coastal city in North County, San Diego. And they had met each other basically in high school. That's where they began their relationship. And it's pretty amazing, isn't it, that these individuals sniffed out the same predator within each other. Now, by all accounts, Cabrera was the dominant figure in the relationship, but therefore a man is always going to be blamed in this context, I promise you. I do not believe for 1 minute that you can say, oh, well, he was the one in charge. He was the one pushing this narrative. No. If you are a female and you go along with it, it's because it's within you too. It's as simple as that. And yes, he may have been more sexually overt in asking for specific things because he is a male. And just on a cultural level, men are brought up with far more confidence on the whole in asking for those fantasies to be met. But you can't enable somebody else to share that fantasy unless they have it. She clearly had it. Now, I've looked back and I can't find a lot about his education or employment, but do we need to know about that? Not really. We just need to know he's a massive deviant pervert. Now, what we do know is between 2014 and 2016, Lyon methodically carried out a scheme of betrayal and sexual violence against the children in her care. Bear in mind, she has this perfect cover. She's a babysitter. We know that at least 4 young girls were victimised by her and by her boyfriend during this period. 2 of those 4 known victims had autism. 1 of those was non-verbal. So literally, how would that child express their terror, their fear, their violation? And all of these children had incredibly engaged, loving parents. But like I said, when you're non-verbal, unless you can actually see physical issues occurring, and that does happen, we find that healthcare professionals will discover abuse in children who are non-verbal because of repeated UTIs and particular issues with private parts, etc. Often we'll find physical abuse where non-verbal children are concerned because of things like fingertip bruising, bruises in odd places. But if that isn't obviously there, can you imagine being a parent? You're just sending your child off to these individual monsters and they have no ability to inform you of just how horrific their time is with those individuals. So her strategy was chillingly predatory. Now, what she would do, she'd gain the parents' trust, she'd groom them. This is through that carefully crafted, cultivated image. And then she would use babysitting access to deliver children to Cabrera for sexual abuse. So basically that's how they worked together. Now, in many of the cases, it turns out the molestation happened in the victim's own homes. This is whilst Lyon is meant to be babysitting. Cabrera would, of course, come over to the family's home once the parents were away. And then under Lyon's watch, he would sexually assault the child. Now, in one incident, Lyon had actually been hired to watch a 3.5-year-old girl at home, 3.5 years of age. Now, she then allowed Cabrera to enter the house, and at this point, the pair changed this little girl's underwear. This is after they abused her. Now, the next morning, that toddler, 3.5 years of age, what a bright little button, she told her mother about the incident. The very first thing out of that baby's mouth was the babysitter's boyfriend was here. They changed my underwear. Now, you can imagine, can't you, the absolute horror of the mother in that moment. And she's obviously going to confront Lyon about this, but what does Lyon do? She tries to cover up the assault. She claims that she alone changed the child's underwear because apparently the elastic was bad. And she says, yes, my boyfriend did come over, but it was only because he dropped off cough medicine. Blatant lie, ready to tell a lie. So obviously prepped and prepared in case these kind of things happened. And obviously relatively believable with respect. You can kind of imagine a 3.5-year-old not necessarily getting all the facts right, but she did get the facts right. Now, at the time, what happened was the mother bravely took that little girl for a doctor's examination. Now, fortunately, the little girl showed no physical injury. That does not mean for 1 minute there was not any kind of sexual molestation. It just means there was nothing physically obvious. And of course, we know that digital penetration, for example, is probably not going to cause any vast injury to a 3.5-year-old child, but it's likely that those two absolute perverts did those kind of things, or oral rape could occur. So it worries me desperately that we would rely on simply a doctor's report saying there's no physical injury present to indicate that that child hadn't actually suffered sexual abuse, because we understand there are different ways that that sexual abuse can occur. But obviously what's amazing about the mother in this case is her intuition was absolutely correct, and indeed was proven correct when months later she actually saw on the news of Lyon's arrest. Can you imagine the dread, the heart just dropping in that moment in time? Now, other abuses took place outside of the children's homes. So Lyon would sometimes take the children out on outings, and she'd do this without their parents. Now, some people will say, well, why would you allow somebody to take a child out of your home when they're going to be babysat? But let's be clear, if you trust somebody and they're going to take them to the park or take them out for some fun somewhere, why would you say no? You want your children to have a vast experience of the world. You want them to enjoy their time outside. So you'd obviously see that as a real positive. And it turned out it wasn't just the perverted abuse that had been carried out. Also, Lyon had filmed dozens of women and girls in public changing rooms, bathrooms, and locker rooms at Cabrera's request. Just imagine that for a moment, because of course there'll be this suggestion that she was just doing what he wanted at the end of the day. What else could she have done? She was probably under his control. That's always a narrative that's just pushed. Imagine your partner saying to you, oh, by the way, would you just mind videoing individuals in states of undress in changing rooms and toilets? You would immediately back off, go straight to the police and say, this man has asked me to do these things that are completely inappropriate, and it would be reprehensible to you. That's what well-adjusted, normal human beings react like. But no, she was like, yeah, cool, I'll go and do that. Again, what does that tell you about the psychology of this individual? The predilection for malevolence, the predilection for perversion. She is literally diseased with this. Now, in mid-2016, the break occurs. So one of the 7-year-old victims basically tells her mum, I don't want to go anywhere with Lyon anymore. Now, this particular girl was a family friend of Lyon's, and this meant that Lyon had babysat for this girl occasionally. Now, you can imagine as a mother, you are immediately going to think, what's going on there? But also, let's be clear, lots of children say they don't want to go specific places, they don't want to hang out with specific people. Children go through those phases. So it's a kind of difficult balance to reach. Is it just that my child is being objectionable, or is it really that my child has got something on a deeper level that she needs to talk about? Fortunately, this mother pressed that child for more information, and the reluctance that she had to see Lyon really raised the mother's suspicions. So she tentatively asked the child to talk a little bit more about her fears about being around Lyon. And at this point, she's horrified to learn that Lyon has been sexually abusing her daughter. Now, the mother immediately does the right thing. She contacts the police, and this triggers the investigation. I mean, thank God for that little girl. Thank God for the bravery and courage of that child. Thank God of the relationship that this mother has with that child. Because let's remember that many children don't talk about abuse because they don't have a connection with a primary caregiver that makes them feel that they can have that conversation. They don't understand what's happening to them, so they don't have that conversation. But for the grace of God, this child has that relationship with the parent, and also has an understanding that she will be trusted by her primary caregiver, the mother in this case. And the mother goes and speaks to the police. This triggers the investigation and finally will bring to an end the perversion of this couple. Now, immediately, as they start investigating, they realise that Lyon is identified as a common link. And crucially, the child's account points to Lyon's boyfriend, Sam Cabrera, as well. So she's able to identify, this is the man who's been harming me. So at this point, Carlsbad PD launched an effort to locate the both of them. And the arrests take place on the 5th of July 2016. And at this point, Cabrera actually attempted to flee, so he wanted to get away. Obviously didn't feel that he wanted to be brought to justice on any level, but there again, these kind of perpetrators and perverted individuals know that prison life is not positive for them for very good reason. Now, there was a brief chase, but he was soon apprehended. Let's just say he was no match for the investigators. Now, together, they initially faced 8 felony charges. So these included conspiracy, forcible child molestation, kidnapping for child molestation as well. And so as the investigation progressed, actually more victims came forward, additional charges were added to both their cases. So by late 2016, what can I tell you? The prosecution had a mountain of evidence, literally a mountain of evidence. Now, on the 8th of July 2016, Lyon and Cabrera were arraigned in Vista Superior Court. Each pled not guilty. I kid you not. They pled not guilty. They pled not guilty in spite of a mountain of evidence, a plethora of evidence, and victims who were openly saying, these are the perpetrators who've harmed me. But you know what? These kind of individuals really do let you into their psyche. Because let's be clear, they don't feel guilty. What they did is completely within their conscience level. They can horribly sexually molest children and feel like they have a right to do that. Now, Cabrera's bail was set at $2.6 million. Lyon's bail was set at around $100,000. I don't think that's right. I think that her bail should have been the same level as his bail, because she isn't just complicit in this, she instrumentally organized the abuse of these children. Now, during Cabrera's arrest, one of the things that the police did was that they searched his vehicle, and guess what they found in his vehicle? They discovered a double-locked box hidden in the car. Inside that box were 6 computer hard drives, and what did they contain? They contained hundreds of videos. So the digital evidence in this case was literally overwhelming. Video after video showing Cabrera and Lyon sexually abusing children. This also disturbingly included footage of them binding and drugging some of the girls. And also bear in mind, this guy has got them locked up in boxes in his car. So we automatically know that he is fully aware that what he is doing is horrifically wrong, and should he be apprehended for this material, he's going to get into serious trouble. But like I said, morally and ethically and legally wrong is only wrong in their eyes should they get caught. It's not wrong in their psyche. They believe that what they're doing is completely acceptable. They believe that assaulting and abusing children is totally acceptable morally and ethically to these perpetrators because they are perverts. It's as simple as that. Now, in these videos, Cabrera is actually seen sexually assaulting them, but Lyon is assisting him. So she might be undressing the child, she'll be holding the camera, or she will indeed be engaging in the abuse herself. Now, it was described by investigators as one of the most disturbing collections of child exploitation material they'd ever encountered. Let that sink in. These individuals, day in, day out, have to witness this kind of horrific material, and this was the most disturbing collection that they witnessed. And it also revealed additional children beyond the 7-year-old victim that the police were already aware of. So suddenly they realised they are absolutely dealing with multiple victims. Now, they also analysed communications between Lyon and Cabrera, which showed that they were regularly communicating and coordinating abuse via text message about how, when, where, and who they were going to attack. Also, this meant that the messages left absolutely no doubt that Lyon was a willful conspirator. She wasn't some kind of reluctant, passive participant. She was fully engaged in this abuse. And in one exchange, Lyon literally, and I mean, this is just despicable, negotiated with Cabrera by offering him time with one of the girls if he would reward her with a date night. Now, on one level, that obviously is helpful to the investigation. It establishes premeditation. But on a moral level, just put yourself in that position. You know, you're texting your partner, I really fancy a date night. Oh, well, we can have a date night, but there's a few things associated with me agreeing to a date night. Oh, what are they? Well, I need you to set up some sexual abuse of a child for me. No problem. Where are we going? Chili's? I swear to God. Could you get more depraved, more perverted, more disgusting, more disgraceful than these two people? Now, one of the things that the investigators had to do was identify all of the victims in the videos, which is horrific, because just think about this. They are sitting watching this horrendous abuse. Then they have to go home to their partners, to their children. They have to see all that material, all that trauma. It impacts on these investigators on a daily basis. They carry the burden of that secondary trauma. And trying to find out who the victims are is so paramount for them, because they know that children need the help and support when they've been abused. And if you can't identify them and the families don't know about it, then those children are left with those scars that are so deep and never tended to. Now, the 4 known victims have been identified via the families who actually came forward, but investigators were really worried and are still worried that there were more. Now, they painstakingly reviewed those videos for any clues, and then in late 2016, 2017, police actually released limited descriptions of the victims to the public because they hoped to find if Lyon had babysat for other families whose children might appear in those videos. Now, as of yet, no further victims have been identified or come forward, but let's be clear, people leave areas, they move from particular counties, so they might not be aware that the police are looking for other victims. Also, certain families live in denial. They don't want to believe anything terrible happened to their child, so they don't come forward. And of course, some just don't hear about the news. Not everyone avidly watches the news or is looking for bulletins that the police are putting out. So it's pretty clear it's likely there will be more victims that haven't yet been identified. Meanwhile, of course, for those victims who were identified, they had to do forensic interviews. So forensic interviews are where they interview children in a really safe, child-centric, friendly environment. And you have very specifically trained individuals who are professional in this area. They then speak to the children because, of course, they want to record the accounts for use at trial. Now, one of the most important things about those professional interviews is they don't re-traumatize the children, whilst equally getting as much information so that you can ensure guilty verdicts for those perpetrators. Now, bear in mind, 2 of the children at this point were older by the time of Cabrera's trial, so they were 10 to 11 years of age. So that means that they're more likely to be able to give across the information that is really helpful to the trial, to the prosecution in particular. But the prosecution also had to rely quite heavily on concrete evidence, such as the videos, the digital communications. But this was absolutely supplemented by testimony from these incredibly brave children and also the incredibly brave mothers who had been the first to hear about this horrific abuse. Now, like I said, the amazing thing about these kind of perpetrators is they often don't feel guilty. And in fact, in this case, both pleaded initially not guilty. Now, neither confessed, neither were cooperative in police interviews, and it's incredible because you think about the fact that they had so much of this information that clearly corroborated they were indeed guilty. To go not guilty just adds to the kind of malice within their mindset. Why not just admit what you did? Why not say you're culpable? Why not say you're responsible? Why not acknowledge your accountability? Why not try to seem an iota of remorse within your psyche, within your being? But no, they just didn't really cooperate. Now, bear in mind, because they were a couple, you would imagine that one of the things that the prosecution might do is levy a deal in one direction. So basically make one partner turn on the other, and that would give one of them a lighter sentence. However, it didn't happen that way. So both of them were charged with essentially the same crimes initially, and they didn't feel they needed Lyon's testimony against her boyfriend because there was so much incriminating digital evidence against him and her. And this meant that the case moved forward with both of them facing separate trials. Now, the Cabrera trial, that went to trial in 2019. His trial was first. He was aged 25 at this point, and that was held at Vista Superior Court in San Diego County. He faced 35 felony counts. These included multiple charges of lewd acts upon a child, forcible lewd acts, kidnapping for sexual purposes, residential burglary, conspiracy as well. So Judge Daniel Goldstein actually presided over this case. The prosecution was led by Deputy DA Jodie Breton. And there isn't a great deal of information about this trial publicly because the media really did focus on Lyon's trial. But the prosecution was basically very able to show the jurors excerpts from literally the hundreds of videos of Cabrera molesting victims between early 2014 and mid 2016. Some encounters were literally caught on multiple cameras at varying angles. So again, the premeditation is enormous. The fact that you have different angles of cameras set up ready to abuse these children. Now, that doesn't mitigate the fact that if you are somebody who suddenly out of the blue abuses a child and you didn't have cameras, doesn't make you equally culpable. What I'm trying to say is it shows you the mindset of this molester. He wanted everything shot from different angles. And again, that speaks to him probably wanting to share on multiple sites these horrendous videos to therefore mean that the child is re-traumatized time and time again, knowing that this kind of information would be out there on the World Wide Web. Now, they found recordings of 4 girls, 2 7-year-olds and 2 children around 3 years of age. And in some instances, the victim was actually blindfolded. Could you be any more sadistic? Now, the mothers of the victims, they took the stand. They obviously wanted to tell their side of the story. And they recounted how they had found and hired Lyon through childcare websites, that nothing had initially seemed amiss because, of course, she was presenting as this really lovely caregiver. She was doing research into childcare. She was studying the area. What was not to like? She seemed literally picture perfect. Now, one mother described her autistic daughter's situation, which when you play this out in your head regarding how this mother must feel now, you can just see the desperation that she will have felt knowing this occurred, because her child was developmentally delayed. She was on the autistic spectrum. She wasn't able to bathe or dress herself, and she couldn't speak. How could she express her trauma? How could she express her terror? And her mother is sending her off with Lyon because she believes she can trust her. The unspeakable betrayal there is just enormous. She even detailed how Lyon offered to give extra outings for her daughter because she was going to do this school research, and she was unaware, of course, as well as a mother, that Cabrera was ever around her child. She didn't even know that. She's just sending her off thinking, how wonderful that this woman wants to spend extra time with my daughter, which, to be honest, gives the mother some respite. When you have a very disabled child, it's exhausting for you. And when you think you can trust someone and that person genuinely makes you feel like they like spending time with your child for all the right reasons, it gives you a moment to pause, to have a coffee and sit down and, I don't know, watch something on Netflix, which you absolutely deserve. For that mother, it is just the biggest betrayal. Now, when it came to the defense, well, there wasn't one. I'm not even joking. There wasn't a defense. So Cabrera didn't actually testify in his own defense because there was nothing that he could have done that could have in any way have vindicated him from what his guilt was. It's obvious. It's all on video. So you won't be surprised for a moment to find out that on the 5th of October 2019, it took the jury just 2 hours. 2 hours to reach that decision. And guess what? He was found guilty on all of the 35 charges, and rightfully so. I don't think anybody would have expected any other conclusion. But when it came to the sentencing, I like this judge. Let me just say that before I go into what he was sentenced to. So that took place in October 2021. Cabrera is 28 years of age at that point, and he was sentenced to 8 life terms without the possibility of parole. Then, for good measure, he was given an additional 295 years to life, plus another 9 years and 4 months on top of that. So in all, 8 life sentences, around 304 years that adds up to. Now, under California law, kidnapping a child to commit a sexual offence can actually carry an automatic life without parole sentence because, I don't know, in California, they actually take child abuse seriously, which is something I promise you in the UK, we really don't seem to these days. I have absolute respect for the American laws around sexual abuse of children. It is stern, it is strict, it demonstrates huge consequences for offenders, and because of that, it is a deterrent to some degree. In the UK, these days, people just seem to be getting a slap on the wrist. It is devastating, but it is true. So I'm so glad he got 304 years. I kind of wish we could keep him alive to serve all of them, but don't worry, after he dies in prison, well, he will immediately be taken in a burning lift to the very depths of hell, where the big DEVIL will have a whole eternity of him burning brightly and probably having unspeakable things happen to him too. So we can all look forward to that. Now, Cabrera apparently showed very little remorse and didn't really show any incident when he was given that sentence, but the judge did enjoy informing him that he was never going to get out. Now, when it came down to Lyon, after Cabrera's trial, she's basically still waiting for her day in court. And actually, it's pretty insane. It was nearly 7 years after her 2016 arrest, her trial still hadn't begun. Now, that is really unusual, because even if you account for the COVID pandemic backlog, that still is a very long period of time to wait. And it's taken a whole toll on the victims' families, because one mother actually said about this in mid-2023, this has just been delayed and delayed and delayed, and the victims are not being prioritised. And they're right, because when you've had such a horrific experience, when you know your child has been absolutely molested in the most grotesque of ways, videoed, potentially shared online, all those things that go through your head that make you fill with rage. The one thing you want to know is that person, that perpetrator, is never going to walk the streets again. You need to know that they are going down, 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 down. And of course, this woman is going down all the way to hell shortly, I imagine, as far as eternity is concerned. But nonetheless, until you get that validation, until you find out that's going to be the case, you don't have any sense of closure around it. You know, you're dealing with the trauma anyway of what's happened to your child, but you're dealing constantly with the trauma of not knowing what's going to happen next. Now, the delay was caused by multiple factors. First of all, Lyon initially pleaded not guilty because she's a massive narcissist, and she was basically preparing to fight the charges, so that means extensive pre-trial litigation. I don't know why it would have been that extensive. I think probably the defence person would just have looked at the one page and gone, you're really guilty, why are we going to go not guilty? Doesn't seem to be extensive. You know, what was extensive was the prosecution material, which evidenced that there was no defence. But nonetheless, that was one of the reasons. Then COVID-19, obviously that paused jury trials for a significant amount of time. That was in 2020, 2021. Not that any of us need reminding about that time period, but nonetheless. Then in 2023, Lyon switched attorneys. So a private lawyer withdrew and a public defender, Sloane Ostby, took over her defence. Lucky Sloane. I bet Sloane was like, oh, this is going to be one of those cases where I need to read nothing. You don't have a defence. There's no defence. But obviously that meant that the council had to get up to speed, which probably took them 1.5 minutes just having a look at one of the videos. That would be enough, wouldn't it, to make, you know, she's banged to rights, dead to rights, she's going down. But nonetheless, this delayed the trial again. So we get to the 29th of May 2025, which is staggeringly nearly 9 years after her arrest. 9 years of waiting, 9 years of constant trauma for the family, 9 years of no justice as far as the families are concerned. And at this point, finally, she pleads guilty. I have no idea why it took her that long to plead guilty. I mean, genuinely. Janice in the canteen, if you could just come forward, have a little look at this docket and decide whether you think she should go guilty or not guilty. Maybe you can just preside over the case, because you'll come to the same conclusion. But it took that long. So as part of a plea deal, she was given a plea deal, but don't get too scared by this result. She admitted to 4 felony counts of sexually assaulting children. She specifically pled guilty to 2 counts of a lewd act upon a child, and also 2 counts of forcible lewd acts upon a child. Also, She formally admitted to a series of special allegations attached to those counts. These included that she'd kidnapped a victim, she'd committed residential burglary, and that she had multiple victims as well. Now, each of those allegations enhances the severity of the crime. That means it would influence sentencing. Now, the prosecutors, they announced that under the plea, they would seek a sentence of 100 years to life in prison. And essentially, her plea did not spare her from life behind bars, only from life without parole and the ordeal of an entire trial. Because obviously, if you go not guilty, you are going to have to go through the trial process. And when you are so guilty, as this deviant pervert is, it's not going to be a pleasant experience for you, because the eyes of the world will be up on you and the eyes of the world will see what an absolute monster you are. When it came down to the sentencing, that took place on the 14th of August 2025 at the Vista Courthouse in North San Diego County. Bear in mind, she's now 31 years of age because she's been in prison for 9 years awaiting that trial and sentencing. Now, when it came down to the prosecution, the DA, Breton, addressed the court to summarise the case one last time, and also, of course, to argue for a harsh sentence. They very well highlighted how Lyon's wholesome persona had enabled her crime. She literally wore that mask of acceptability, covering the monster within, emphasised that she presented herself as this perfect babysitter, just somebody that parents would trust because she seemed so trustworthy. And they brought into the court the fact that that made her that perfect vehicle for these crimes. She knew what she was doing. She knew that she was doing this performative stance of seeming so sickly sweet, so kind, so vocational, so absolutely committed to children, when all the while she was a monster perpetrating these crimes and organising the filming of these crimes with a boyfriend. That prosecutor walked the court through the impact on each victim and how each victim had been subjected to literal unspeakable abuse that totally destroyed their childhoods, their innocence, and they really hit home how the cruelty existed in this case, that Lyon had drugged and tied up children to facilitate rape. And bear in mind, she could have killed those kids. If you are drugging a child, you have no idea of how dangerous that is, number one. You're not a medical expert, so you don't know about dosage, and yet here you are drugging a child so they don't remember what's happened to them, or it makes it easier for you to rape them. So this could have easily been a murder trial. It's as simple as that. Now, the defense didn't have one. Sorry again. You know, the defense is there. I bet the defense was just like, I'm just gonna like read a book because I have nowhere to go with this, literally. But they basically acknowledged the gravity of harm that Lyon had caused. They didn't make any excuses for her because there are none. You don't get to have excuses for this. She was a willing and active participant in the abuse. But what they did do is they presented an apology letter. I kid you not. When it comes down to arrogance, Lyon is definitely somebody who exhibits it. So she wrote an apology letter and she wanted it to be read out by her defence lawyer, by Ostby. And in this, Lyon addressed the victim's family directly and she said, "The words, 'I'm sorry,' are far too simple for the amount of trauma I've caused and the amount of regret I feel." Oh, because it's all about you, isn't it? You're sorry. You're sorry. The word sorry really doesn't count. Maybe if she started it with the words, "I'm a monster, I'm reprehensible, I'm deviant, I'm a pervert, I'm a disgrace to the human race, and I hate myself for that," maybe I'd have a little bit of time to listen. But "I am sorry." Just a little bit too simple, she says, for the amount of trauma that she's caused, those words. Yeah, just a little bit too simple. You're correct, because you're not sorry for a start. You're sorry you got caught. And secondly, we can tell that because if you literally had a shred of remorse, there is no way you would write those lines. You would be far more condemning of yourself. And then, get this, she admitted that the parents had trusted her to keep their children safe, and instead, she placed them in harm's way. Sorry, just go through that with me again. I placed the children in harm's way. What was the way? Well, I put them in harm's way. What was the way? Well, they were just in harm's way. You were the harm. You know, she was harm's way. She is the harm. She literally is evil, malevolent, grotesque, perverted, orchestrated the horrific systemic abuse of these children and presented them also to her perverted partner who also engaged in that. That's not placing them in harm's way. You are the harm. And then this is the pièce de résistance. You know, when it comes down to this is not going to do as far as an apology, she called her actions selfish, inconsiderate, and thoughtless. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm imagining, like me, you have on occasion been selfish, inconsiderate, and thoughtless. They are not words that we associate with raping children. Selfish, inconsiderate, and thoughtless do not come close to the words that need to be attributed to this horrible POS. You weren't selfish, you were a rapist. You weren't inconsiderate, you were inhuman. And you weren't thoughtless, you were very thoughtful about exactly what you wanted to do to those children, and you didn't give a crap about the trauma you would cause them or their families. You are not selfish, inconsiderate, and thoughtless. You were a monster. You were a demon. And you deserve to have every single second of the rest of your thankless, pathetic life infected with the thoughts of the harms you did to those little girls. You deserve no peace, not a second. I hope they haunt you in life. I hope they haunt you in death as you burn brightly in hell. She said that she had been thinking for 9 years about what to say, but realised no words could undo the harm she's done. 9 years? You've been thinking for 9 years. I've had 9 years. 9 years. And you came up with selfish, inconsiderate, and thoughtless. It's taken me a couple of seconds to come up with appropriate words for you, and they're nothing like as minimal as those you shared with the court. 9 years. She said sorry, and she thought she was a bit thoughtless, inconsiderate. I mean, I have regularly been thoughtless and inconsiderate, very often, because at the end of the day, I'm a human, but I've never caused anyone dire harm, nor would. Those words do not even come close to anything that would represent that she has remorse. Also, she started to cry as parts of a letter were read out. Was that because she realised that they were absolutely pathetic? Maybe during that moment she was like, ooh, I sound like an inconsiderate, horrific, evil cow. But anyway, I imagine she was crying for herself. We see them do it all the time, don't they, with these predators? They don't half have a lot of feelings for their own needs, just not for any of their victims. Now, the heart of the sentencing hearing really came when the victims' families spoke out. One of the mothers, whose daughter was 3.5 years old, 3.5, when Lyon abused her, said, "You are the most sick and evil monster that society has. What you did to these innocent and most helpless of children without any conscience, care or concern or ounce of remorse is unfathomable." Amen to that. She's entirely correct. Another mother said, "We let you into our home and into our lives. Because of that, my family has endured almost 10 years of suffering and pain. The betrayal is a wound that has never healed." The third mother directly confronted Lyon's manipulation and said, "You knew how to win our trust, and you knew how to manipulate to get what you want." Now, when it came down to the verdict, Lyon was sentenced to 100 years to life in state prison. This means a minimum term set at 100 years. But it's not that simple. I'm just going to say that before I carry on and tell you the next bit. So, in a very poignant moment, State Senate Minority Leader Brian Jones, who actually attended the trial, released a statement basically praising, rightfully so, the prosecution's effort. And he said, "After the horrific sexual crimes Brittney Lyon committed against children, District Attorney Summer Stephan did her job in securing a just sentence of 100 years to life. They also urged the state must now ensure that she truly serves that time." Now, the fact that he was there demonstrates just how serious this case was to him. But also, it underscored that this case spurred proposed statements in state law, and I'll tell you why. There's a legal loophole. Because despite this very, very long sentence, because obviously 100 years means that she would never get out of prison, one fact remained. Under current California law, Lyon could be eligible to seek parole early. So California has this elderly parole law. So basically what that does, it allows inmates who are 50 years or older and who've served at least 20 years of the sentence to petition for a parole hearing. Now, there is good reason for that to some degree. So the intention of the law was to reconsider incarceration for older people who might no longer be considered a risk. So it acknowledges the cost of keeping the elderly in prison when they might not actually do any harm. But currently, the law does not exclude particular criminals, such as murderers or sex offenders. Now, Lyon was 31 at sentencing. She had roughly 9 years credit for time served in jail since 2016. So she will turn 50 in 2044, meaning she might have around 28 years of actual time in custody. Now, from sentencing, a little over 19 years until she's 50. So that could mean by 2045, Lyon could petition the Board of Parole Hearings for release. This is despite the fact that she's been given a 100 to life sentence. Now, as the San Diego's DA's office put it, Lyon will only have served approximately 28 years, a fraction of the life sentence. So this prospect has really infuriated the victims' families. Also, law enforcement, they want her to serve the rest of her life in prison because it seems as if there's almost this legal loophole that literally undermines the court's intent. And the mother of one victim actually said she feared if Lyon could walk free in a couple of decades, then I don't know what that says about our system. And I completely agree with that. Now, San Diego DA Summer Stephan took action. So even before Lyon's sentencing, Stephan's office had sponsored legislation in Sacramento to change the elder parole law. Not to get rid of it, but to change it, to make it more specific. So Senate Bill 286, that was authored by State Senator Brian Jones, that was introduced basically to exclude sex offenders like Lyon from being eligible for elderly parole because they don't change. These people have a predilection for children. She'll still have that predilection when she's 80. So I completely understand why they want sex offenders excluded. So in essence, SB 286 would carve out an exception so that anyone who was convicted of violent sexual felonies, especially against kids, would not get the benefit of a parole hearing aged 50. Then Assembly Bill 47, which was authored by Assembly members Stephanie Nguyen, they similarly sought to prevent sex offenders from qualifying for early parole under the elder parole program. Now, the push for these bills, that was a direct reaction to cases like Lyon's and others that were very similar. And they said this is just a shameful loophole that might allow a child molester to be released after serving only a third or so of their sentence. And that is a blight on humanity, without a doubt. Now, at the time of Lyon's sentencing in August 2025, both SB 296 and AB 47 are stuck in the legislator's Appropriations Committee. It's in a suspense file, and essentially that means it's stalled, and that also means it's currently at risk of dying without a vote. Now, Senator Brian Jones spoke out strongly about this and said, shamefully, a loophole in California law could allow Lyon to walk free after serving less than a third of a sentence. Senate Bill 286 would close this loophole and ensure violent child rapists serve their full sentences. And he's actually implored his colleagues to stop protecting predators, move the bill forward. Now, DA Stephan stated, our goal in supporting these bills is to safeguard the just sentences that violent sex offenders and murderers are given by the courts. The victims, their families, and the safety of all children in California need to be the priority, not Ms. Lyon and other violent child molesters like her. The age of 50 is hardly elderly, particularly in the realm of child molesters. Very well said indeed, and I know that we all agree with that. Now, supporting these legislative efforts, San Diego County Supervisor Jim Desmond, he announced that he was going to introduce a county board resolution urging the state to pass SB 286 and AB 47. He stated, "This is a critical step in protecting the safety of our communities, particularly our most vulnerable populations. By excluding violent sex offenders from elder parole, we are closing a dangerous loophole." And at the time of me doing the research here, SB 286 and AB 47 have not yet become law. They are stalled, which is just horrific. Because the last thing that we want are child molesters walking the streets. I am hard line on this. I am zero tolerance. I am never let them out of prison. It's as simple as that. Now, the victims' families have spoken out about this because understandably it's affected them massively. And when it comes down to it, the victims' families have said, no matter what happens to Lyon, the true life sentences in this case are being served by the victims. In fact, one mother has described how her daughter, now in her teens, and this is just horrific, still struggles with the trauma. She's nonverbal, so she can't fully work through her issues in trauma therapy. She can't communicate the nightmares that she has. She can't talk about the anxieties that she deals with on a daily basis. The mother said for years, her daughter wouldn't let anyone change her clothes or touch her. Literally, she's had her safety, her serenity, her sanctuary stolen. Another parent said that her young daughter developed such serious night terrors and such severe separation anxiety that it's taken years of therapy for her to even sleep in her own bed again or to just trust a caregiver. So again, they have stolen the safety of these children's psyches. They've made them question everything and everyone. And that's something that will have ramifications throughout the rest of their lives. And these are children who already had vulnerabilities. It is blindsiding to imagine there is ever a loophole that could see somebody who's been sent to prison for 100 years walk free when they are 50 years of age in 2045. How is that justice? And like I said, zero tolerance where these particular individuals are concerned. This woman does not deserve to ever be free again. She systematically abused children, videoed children, got her boyfriend to do whatever he wanted to those children. And then she said in court that she was sorry. She said in court, that she should have been a little bit more thoughtful. She has no remorse, and therefore no compassion should ever be afforded her on any level. Like I said, the one thing I have is a trust in the universe at the moment that she takes her last breath, albeit hopefully that last breath will be in prison where she will have had a horrible time because they do not like child molesters in prison. My only hope is that in that final moment, the only light that she sees as she takes her last breath is one that is bright red and burning, because that will mean that finally justice has been done. When she and he burn eternally in hell, that's when true justice will have been afforded these children. Am I being harsh? Do you disagree? Do you think she should be given an option of parole? Or do you, like me, believe that when it comes down to abusing the most vulnerable in our society, to molesting them in a sexual way, to rape them, do you believe that they should be ever afforded even iota of compassion? For me, it's a clear no. It will always be a clear no. And I don't care who wants to rephrase these paedophile child molesters as MAPS, minor attracted persons. I actually worry deeply about that type of human as well. Why would you wish to minimise? Why would you wish to suggest that this is a predilection that can't be controlled and should be seen as a sexual orientation where we have compassion? No, they're perverts. They're perverts. And they should be treated as such. Take care, guys. In cases like this, just remember, hug your babies just that little bit tighter and feel grateful that you haven't handed them over in a trusting way to individuals who perpetrate this kind of abuse. And to all of you, and so many of you get in contact with me, so many of you have been through this kind of abuse, I am sorry that these kind of bastards exist. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you again next time. Be safe.